Hi folks, Barnaby Dixon here. So to recap, DABCHICK is breaking. I was able to 3D scan him and digitally back him up prior to the plastic degrading entirely. Last episode I tried printing some of DABCHICK's parts and had some pretty mixed results at best. In this episode I'd like to play around with scale a little bit in the hopes of getting some really phenomenal detail in the final print. Thanks for joining me.
Kabawanga.
Bit more. That should do. So maybe you folks have done this before, or you are out on a balloon, and let me do a little smiley face. That's better. And then you let some of the air out of the balloon, and your writing becomes really small and neat, even if the handwriting is a little bit atrocious and the message is overly obvious. But this is just to demonstrate how when you have the ability to play around with scale, you can have a lot more control over your creation. Thought I was going to do a bit, hang on. That was better. So 3D printing actually allows you to do something like this. You can scale up the object, and so long as it still fits on the print bed, you can print it at any scale. And this should give me the opportunity to regain some of that detail that was lost in the scan. To figure out how much detail, let's take a look at a few things. So first up, we have DABCHICK's head. This is the one that we're recreating. Then we have the scan of DABCHICK's head. And then we have the print of the scan of DABCHICK's head. And if you're noticing a little bit of degradation, you're correct. Let's zoom in a little bit and see what's missing. Now there is of course some chromatic definition that the first head has that the other two will not have for obvious reasons, but even accounting for that, we are losing some three-dimensional information. Now I am a firm believer in the capabilities of this scanner, especially when you consider its price point compared to other ones on the market, and when you consider how small the details that we're trying to capture are. But what if we did want to capture more detail? So this is a ×2 scale resin print of DABCHICK's head. The print failed, but even F-ups sometimes deserve a second chance. And since there's a hole in the plastic film again, and the printer needs some maintenance, he is at this point the best damn chance we have. Milliput is a 2-part epoxy putty that hardens when you mix those two parts together. I haven't used it so much since thermoplastic became my main material, but I'm returning to my roots, and so is DABCHICK actually, because as you might be able to tell from the colour, the first ever DABCHICK was actually made from this exact material. However, since the 3D print is a slightly more pale skin tone colour, I'm adding a little bit of acrylic paint into the mix in order to colour match what we already have. I have found that so long as the acrylic paint is kept minimal in its proportions compared to the other elements, it doesn't seem to affect the curing process at all. Milliput is also a type of resin, so I'm hoping that this will bond very well to the 3D printed resin. As you can probably tell by now, my aim is to build up the areas that the printer failed to print. But this actually isn't the only thing that I'm doing here. This is one process of a few that aims to bring a lot more detail to the final print. Way more detail, in fact, than this one has here.
Why must you undermine me?
So two things should ensure this. Firstly, Milliput is a lot easier to sculpt with than the thermoplastic. And secondly, at ×2 scale, myself and the scanner have a much better chance of capturing those finer details. So as I sculpt, I'll talk a little bit about the design of DABCHICK's face. So it's a fairly uniform terracotta colour with the exception of the metal elements. This is the beak and the eyes. I do feel that whatever the final version of the puppet ends up being made out of, or whatever process I use, I would like these metal elements to remain. This should be easy enough with the eyes. They're essentially stock parts. The outer part is made from brass, a small length of tubing. The inner part of the eye is actually an M2 nut, and it has a nice shine to it because I was able to kind of countersink it with a drill bit. So he literally has that nice shiny glint in his eye. The beak, however, is a little bit more tricky. It's made from a thin sheet of brass, and it has to be cut and very carefully bent and folded to get the shape. Now, to get consistent results for backups or replacements would be very tricky. My friend Bobby Duke actually made a video recently where he used this type of metal putty that can be fired in a kiln. It can then be polished and you can get some really great effects. He was able to with this lovely octopus pendant. So I had the thought that I could get consistent results with this using a silicone mold, but it would have to be taken out prior to firing. I don't think it would be able to support its own shape. Stamping and cutting out the shape with some sort of bespoke, specially made press also seems like overkill. One approach that seems particularly intriguing is electroplating. Now you can actually do this with 3D prints, even resin prints, and there's a YouTuber called Hen3D, I'm not completely sure how to pronounce his name, but he's done a wonderful series on this process and how to do it exactly on a variety of different prints. Now again, as with the other approaches, this is complete overkill, but actually the prospect of applying this to future projects is so tantalizing. The pieces aren't terribly big too, so it might be a little bit simpler than some of the pieces that Hen3D Rick has done. But we'll put a pin in it for now. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments surrounding these approaches. Okay, so now the milliput has hardened, I'm using a rotary tool with a bunch of attachments to get a lot more definition. I'm mostly focusing on the feathers around DABCHICK's head just to give them a bit more depth and a bit more shape. I'm doing the same to the seam line around the beak. And if you think this looks painful, you should take a listen to how it sounds. So once this process was done, it was back to the milliput to accentuate the definition a little bit more. This couldn't have been done in the first session because some material needed to be ground away to make room for these details. Plus, it's a lot easier to add these details to a solid foundation. In a similar vein, it was getting quite tricky to keep hold of the piece without accidentally squishing the recently added uncured milliput. So here's another interesting technique. You can actually put milliput in the freezer to slow down the curing process. So this allowed time for the already applied milliput to solidify for 20 minutes or so. Then I was able to retrieve a little bit of that frozen stuff, thaw it between my fingers, and then finally add it to the model with much greater ease. So once the second milliput session was complete and the resin had cured, I was able to sand down the piece. But as I was doing this, I had a thought. I've just had a thought. Oh, Now that was my reaction because although it is an exciting thought, it does mean rethinking a fair bit of what I've already done. So as you know, the aim of this process was to sculpt a double scale DABCHICK head so that when he was finally scanned and printed and shrunk down to the original scale, a lot of those details would remain. But this process also offers an opportunity to do something that goes beyond the aesthetics. I could feasibly model by hand some mechanisms in DABCHICK's head and perhaps other parts of the body too that would be far too fiddly to have done on the original scale. Some things that come to mind is perhaps I could figure out a way to have DABCHICK blink. I could also perhaps look at the feathers on the head and find a way for them to fan out and add another degree of expressivity in his performance. Now, I am cognizant that if I do this, I would want to couple it with some good design choices, and part of that would be respecting the original design that has become established. That being said, the prospect of innovating in this way will probably prove too tempting for me to resist. But anyway, at this point I would like to thank my patrons again for the continued financial support. You can find my page over at patreon.com/barnabydixon. And if you'd like to see more of these episodes, hit subscribe and notifications, and you should be notified when I upload the next episode. Thanks for watching. Okay, before you go guys, this is Barnaby from the next day feeling like a utter dum-dum because I didn't show you the final sculptor. Here it is. So as you can tell, I did do a little extra detail around the eyes. This could be useful if we do end up going the electroplating route. Although, of course, if we do go a more mechanical route in the head, the back of the head, particularly where the feathers are, will change a fair bit. So I scanned this one, and here's the scanned result comparative to the old scan of the smaller head, and you can see how much quality we've gained. I'm very happy with the results. Anyway, that is the end. Thank you for watching.